First order of business is to get a group photo with everyone. So I'm actually going to get you all to stand up, please. And group into the middle a little bit if you can. We've got professional photographers on the job here. Come into the middle. Here we go. Oh, look, you look like an army of conservationists.
Can you just come forward at the back? Just squeeze in. Ready? You guys want it? Keep coming. That's good. That sounds good. Put on three, all right? 3, 2, 1. Woo! All right, how's that? All right.
Thank you. All right, everybody, the final plenary of the conference. It's called Unite for Nature. The Global Biodiversity Framework can seem like a remote bunch of people somewhere off overseas just making up words, putting them on paper, but in actual fact, the framework could be harnessed to drive real change for nature, or at least I hope it can, and this next panel has some ideas on that. So if I invite the panellists to come up, Jody Gunn is back to facilitate this session with some of the heavyweights of private land conservation in Australia. Now, Jody has worked for Bush Heritage, but more importantly, she's now the CEO of ALCA, the overarching body that's pulled all of you together here into the room. So, open up that app, start typing those questions, because there will be time for questions with this panel, and there's probably nothing in private land conservation that these people are not across, right? So, have at it.
Thank you, Anne. Yes. It is great to be up on the stage with these fabulous people, and we are nearly at the end. I have the absolute privilege of working with some amazing organisations, individuals, landholders, people all over the country, and we are super lucky to have 4 organisations who are partners of the conference, who are members of the Australian Land Conservation Alliance, and who do incredible work at scale, both in protecting for the long term in perpetuity, restoring lands, maintaining lands, and partnering with a huge range and diversity of people all over the country. So it's really very easy to stand up here as the CEO of ALCA, to be able to engage with and represent with not only the people here on this stage, but also all of you in the room. It's hugely motivating. So we thought we would just do a couple of things through this particular panel. We want to share a few reflections in the context of what we've been hearing over the last couple of days, really. And just more generally, we want to talk a little bit about urgency and scale. We want to explore what some of the enabling factors are for the work that we're doing and talk about the theme and what that means for organisations that are out there on the ground. We still will have a Q&A, so do feel free to put that into the program, into the app. So we'll start with a few reflections. Before I do, I've been completely remiss in pointing them all out, but then not introducing them all. So firstly, we have Heather Campbell. Heather is the CEO of Greening Australia, and I've had the privilege of having Heather as my boss a couple of times in different roles, so it's nice to have Heather on the stage. Tim Allard, the CEO of the Australian Wildlife Conservancy, and also a director of ALCA. We have Sue O'Connor, who is a board member of Bush Heritage Australia. She is the chair, and she also chairs many other incredible organisations across the country in a lot of different industries. So we're lucky to have Sue on the panel to explore things in a more diverse way. And again, we've got Tony Jupp. Now, Alison Rowe does send her apologies and wishes she could be here. We are very lucky to have Tony represent the Nature Conservancy. Again, not just a national organisation, but a global organisation and reach as well. So, wow. So reflections. Just want to ask you, we can start with you, Heather, as you're right next to me. Over the last few days, what have been some of the insights or observations that you've been having about the discussion today over the last few days?
Thanks, Jodie. And before I go to insights about the discussions, I think the key thing has been the energy, the excitement, the connection that people are making. To have 400 people back together face-to-face is phenomenal, but also across so many different sectors, all coming together, all with common goals to try and solve these really big challenges that we've got. So I think somebody mentioned it yesterday that I don't think, back in 2019 when we were all face-to-face then, we would have imagined that we would have had so many people from a finance and a business perspective. The conversation has fundamentally changed from what it was back then. Yes, we all want more money, so that's still, core, but there was very much a focus on it being very much just sort of more policy and about the government. Here it's been very much about all of us. How do we all have a role to play? How do we actually get the mechanisms to work? How do we really overcome some of the barriers? And yes, there's still a bit around policy and how can government lift as well, but we're all in this together. It's probably my big reflection.
Yeah, thanks. Before we hand over to Tim, I'll come back to you in a second. Tim, Tony, you've been here, diving deeply in across the couple of days, including workshops. What are your reflections?
Yeah, thanks, Jodie. The interrelatedness of everything, whether that's talking in groups about mob or science, from science perspective, or policy or markets, or as we saw earlier this morning, from finance, from a banking background. So, and the fact that you can't really treat the issue we have with any one of those individually. It's got to be all of us together, and we're all, by being here, we're proving the fact that we can and do want, like, coming together and working together. So it's being able to put that into action, because like when speaking this morning with the finance people, you realise you're really talking about the same thing, but you're probably using different language for it. So, and the finance world normally for a conservationist is difficult to understand, and vice versa. So it's really, it's good that those doors are opening up, but it's how everything is interrelated.
Yeah. Tim or Sue?
Thanks, Jodie. I've only been here today, and how fantastic it is to be with everyone face to face, because, we've been through years where we've been doing all these things via Zoom, and Zoom is good, however, but. And I think that's part of the thing is to deliver at scale, we need to be thinking about this from a systems-wide perspective, which Tony was talking about. what are the roles that each of our organisations play, and then what are the collaborations and the relationships that we have, and how do we still continue to nurture the heart of what it feels like to be out on country, at the beach, whatever it is, to be able to deliver what we need to deliver. So my reflection is we've got all of the elements there for us to deliver at scale. We just need to start to think about how we apply it and how we go after it, and it's really exciting.
It's difficult to know where to start, so similar with Sue, I've been here today, but in chatting to the people from the AWC team that have been here for the week and chatting to other people that have been here over the last few days, there's the themes of ambition, wanting to drive change, the innovation, and Heather, what you said before, that a few years ago we'd come to a session like this and the conversation really was around what's government doing and how are we lining up with government and regulation and policy settings. But here, the defining theme for me is leadership. This is the private sector coming together to demonstrate leadership of getting stuff done at scale and getting it going now. The innovation and the leadership for innovation is pretty bloody cool.
That's absolutely right. It has been inspiring to see the leadership that's going on from all of you in the room. So to pick it up a level, what about the things that you've been experiencing in the insights? Is that reflected in the discussions and things that are happening outside this room?
Do you want us to start in the same order? We'll give it a go. I think it is. I think what is great about this is, I don't know about any of the rest of you, but I'm going, there's 50 phone calls I was meant to make before I came here, and I've been able to have 50 conversations here. And so I think it is really reflective of what is happening outside. What is great about this conference is it's allowed people to connect and go, and while you're here, come and meet this person, and rather than doing an email introduction. So I think we're seeing a lot of energy more broadly. We're seeing people really recognise that to make this happen, it's going to need a mixture of all of us. It's going to be philanthropy, it's going to be business, it's going to be governments, it's going to be civil society, corporations. And so I think we're seeing that momentum. I think part of the challenge, of course, is it's complex. And there's momentum that's been built on from the carbon side of things, but recognising that biodiversity is harder, but people are leaning into the challenge. And that's what I find really encouraging. People aren't shying away from it. They're actually leaning and say, actually, how do we make this work? How do we actually connect people?
And Tim, I think you've just come back, from being overseas. How are the conversations over there at a strategic level?
Thank you, Jodie. Well, I've come back from two places. So I've just come back from Queensland, where we're doing a project with northern hairy-nosed wombats. And so, that's an example of private landholders, philanthropy, government and private conservation coming together to do cool things and get stuff done. In the 2 weeks before that, I was in New York for Climate Week. And again, many of us in the sector now are talking about this, but the world has talked about climate crises, but the world is only just starting to talk about the biodiversity crises. And I think we as a conservation sector, as a conservation movement, have really got to find a way to make the crisis of biodiversity interrelated with climate change, because frankly they are. If we solve one without the other, we're screwed anyway. So we have to solve both together. One without the other is, we're stuffed. So we've got to solve these together. The other one that leapt out to me was how little attention Australia got on a world stage. Conservation, biodiversity decline is really talked about in context of Africa, South America, North America to a degree, because that's where Climate Week was. But we have remarkable biodiversity. You guys all know this. 85% of what we have in this bloody country is unique to this country. Australia represents 5% of the planet's landmass, and somewhere between 7% and 10% of all biodiversity is in Australia. So what we have matters. If we screw it up, we're screwing it up at a planetary scale. We've got the ability, the leadership, the innovation, the ambition to really change things and have an impact on the planet we all live on.
No, that's great. I wonder, Sue, you talked about scale before and getting to scale and just moving on to that urgency and scale discussion. what are the things that you think are really important that would be able, and enable us to get to scale or achieve the approach that you're talking about?
I actually think for us to deliver on I don't want to use the word opportunity, but to deliver on the need, I think there's 6 things we need to be thinking about. And first off, it's about taking a real systems thinking approach to this, because each of our organisations can be working in different parts of the system to be able to deliver the outcome, and that can vary from policy to measurement to science to boots on the ground to finance, all of those things. And what as an industry, and I think ELCA, this is an opportunity for ELCA, and some of the other peak bodies, where do we apply the most pressure, attention and resource to be able to get the change that we're after? So that's number 1. Number 2 is around finance, and I think that it is we need to significantly grow the pie, because this is about government, although I think we just really need to face into the fact that governments are constrained at the moment. So we need to have the really big role that I think that governments can play is around policy, which I'll come back to. So where is the finance, and how are we going to work with those finance folk from philanthropy, from business, from investors, all of the different elements? How do we get money that is recurrent revenue as well as one-off revenue? And I think we need to, because if we double the size of the pie, that means that we're doing hopefully 3 times as much work. Thirdly, I think it's around partnerships, and it's partnerships within the sector. It's working with the agricultural sector, with government, with the water sector. I'm just the retiring chair of Yarra Valley Water, and you heard from the wonderful Chris Brace this morning. It's with investors, because none of us can do this by ourselves. The next thing is around leadership and people development. If we're going to double or triple what it is that we're doing, we need great leadership. And how are we acting as a sector to develop those leaders? How are we getting all of the people from the ground up? And we heard that anyone who's in an environmental course gets a job halfway through, that type of thing. So we need to be really focusing on that, because that can be a limiter for us. But part of that is also about innovation and agility, because if you're going to triple in size about what you're doing, you're not going to be able to do that by tripling the number of people. So how are we using AI, technology, satellites, drones, whatever it is, to be able to triple what it is that we're doing? And finally, it's around policy and legislation, and I think this is the thing that we need to be looking to government to more than anything else. For example, with the Special Wildlife Reserves legislation that's in Queensland, if that was replicated in other states, wouldn't that be great? Because we could have protection for our private land at the same standard as national parks. What's going to happen with the market repair, the Nature Repair Act? Those are the things where government, it's always good to be able to go to government and say, if you fix these 3 things, this is what we can do for you. So I think just thinking about that. So they're the 6 things: system thinking, finance, partnerships, leadership, innovation and agility, policy and legislation.
Would anyone like to build on those? It's a pretty good list.
Well, yeah, thank you. I tried not to write down all 6 getting a lesson up here, but I was going to respond to something that Tim said before. So, as everyone would know, the Nature Conservancy is a global organisation, so we work in 80 countries, or we've just moved out of Myanmar, unfortunately, for perhaps obvious reasons. So 79 countries across the world, and we've got ambitious 2030 targets for the protection of lands and waters and oceans. But for our lands target, which is 650 million hectares worldwide by 2030, of lands that are either protected, restored or have improved management upon them. TNC Australia, so as one business unit within those 79 countries, is carrying the 90 million hectares of that. So 14% of TNC's global target is in just our one country. But I do agree, Tim, with what you're saying. You go overseas and we kind of disappear as a country, but just flying the flag a bit that within TNC at least it's quite a significant, because we're one country but also one continent.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, the scale and size is immense, and it makes me think about, a lot of the discussions, that we're having globally at the Global Biodiversity Framework and also here in Australia around Indigenous people and local communities in that context. And I'm just wondering if there are some reflections on, how globally in that context, that we can address and enable that, and the frameworks like the Global Biodiversity Framework that really puts that front and centre, in and across. What are the opportunities for organisations like our own to enable and leadership, access, ownership and management for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities?
Perhaps I'll go quickly to start that off and then hand the microphone off. So one thing I might have touched on earlier today too was about conservation finance, is embedding that in your teams. So that's the reality, which we have to all get better at blended finance and other financial structures for funding the work we do, because it's not just going to be in future, especially at scale, it's not just going to be a philanthropist donation or a government grant. It's going to be a combination of all sorts of different things. So getting better at conservation finance, and that's why at the Nature Conservancy in Australia, we've actually moved our conservation finance team into the conservation team, rather than it being seen as like a fundraising or something, because that's just integral to what we're going to have to do. We haven't fully enmeshed them yet because it's still early days, and we've got financiers speaking a different language to biologists, but yeah, getting there, because blended finance, conservation finance, innovative finance is what we're going to have to achieve, what we're going to have to secure to achieve what we want to achieve.
I'll come back to the Indigenous question, but I just want to pick up there. I work in several different worlds, as Jodie alluded to, and one of them is in the superannuation industry. I work for Mercer Superannuation. Mercer is a global organisation. They run a global investment forum every year, which goes in 5 locations around the world. Paris, London, sort of sounds like the ultimate trip, doesn't it? Tokyo. So when you're sitting in the room with asset managers and asset owners who would be managing more than $1 trillion of money. I've been going to that forum for 7 years. So 7 years ago, they first started to talk about climate change, and to be honest, people could barely spell it, many of them, to where we are now, where there's just trillions of dollars that is going into the net zero transition. For the first time at the forum that I was at in May, biodiversity was an agenda topic. It was a workshop that was being run on biodiversity and how that was going to be incorporated into their assessments of investments, how that they were going to be looking at how to monetise it. And the thing that was interesting, and it was sort of goes to the measurement, these are people who really need to have measurement to have some credibility and to know that they're getting the returns that they're after. One of the first things that they were doing, in the absence of having a standard from the ISSB and TNFD wasn't done in a range of things, one of the screens that they were using on funds is, did the organisation have a deforestation policy? Because if it did, it stayed in, and if it didn't, it was being removed. So that was this year. If it tracks the way that it did with climate, which I think it will be far more active, and there will be people who will be starting to look to invest both in nature, but also having more quantitative measures on the opportunities and the risk of the other investments that they've got. So what that means for us is, I think we need to really lean into that space. And I think we also need to lean into having some measures that people are able to use that goes beyond, do you have a policy on deforestation?
Sorry, just onto your original question, Jodie. I think a key thing for all of us here, and we've talked about it a lot this week, is deeply listening. What are the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that we're working with? What are their ambitions? How do they want to run things? How do they want to work with us? And then how we walk together to do that. Because we know that collectively, all of us need to be doing that. We need to heal as a country. We need to heal as a nation, and we know that by healing country, we help to heal communities too. But we need to deeply listen and work together. And so I think there is even greater opportunity because of what's happening around the globe, what you're seeing in the US or Canada with that emphasis as well, and the greater voice of First Nations people. And so it's been fantastic to see so many being involved with panels and discussions and all the side conversations that happen here. And how we then connect that with making sure that there's sustainable, viable business models for them, for their communities. And that's what I'm finding really exciting. There's been some amazing in-depth conversations here about some projects that are happening and how we can get extra funding to connect this bit and how that will work. And so I think that's a very exciting time, and I think there's a real role for our sector collectively to play in helping healing things post what happened with the referendum.
Yeah. Thanks, Heather. Tim, I am thinking about and shifting to enabling factors, and actually there's a question in your Q&A thing where you can answer a question. We'd really like to know from all of you, what are some of, identify the most critical requirement for enabling private land conservation to address Australia's biodiversity crisis. We'd like to hear from you all on that and think about what some of those things are. But Tim, what are for you, do you see as some of the most critical enabling factors? And think about, some of the conversations to that over the last few days have been the role of government, private and philanthropy in funding and resourcing that. What do you think is critical enabling factors?
Thank you, Jodie. So just marshalling my response to that. If I start at the top and I think about it with government, and I appreciate there will be some government colleagues in the room, but if you're not here to help facilitate what we're doing, get out of the way and let us get on and do what we do well. That's one of my key messages around government. We've got this ambition and ability and wherewithal and leadership and drive to want to do things. We need the government to help facilitate that through regulation and policy settings. But if you're not prepared to do it, then pull back and just let us get on with it and do it. The obvious ones is funding. And it's really linking a few things that we've talked about today in the last few days. One of the outcomes of sessions like this is creating common language. Particularly where we're talking finance and we're talking conservation and ecology and a whole range of other things and listening to First Nations. It's how do we find language that brings everybody together and helps communicate stories in the way that everybody can attach themselves to. People, how do we get people? Conservation is nothing without people being motivated and being on the ground. We need people delivering the work. And whether it's boots on the ground, whether it's people deployed regionally, we need people who are skilled and equipped to deliver conservation programs, but also to have leadership skills in running teams of people. Conservation as a movement is relatively new. We need to equip our people to deploy them to be skilled people leaders, people managers. And I think really the final one around funding and so on is incentivising outcomes. One of my pet things I talk about is putting a bounty on feral cats. And if I had $1 for every time somebody brought that up, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. I can tell you that. We should be having an alternate conversation where we can incentivise outcomes. Can we say to a landholder, if you keep feral cat densities below X per hectare, you're going to get a tax offset in the work that you do. Let's incentivise ways of getting stuff done. We always need to appeal to the heart. We need to raise philanthropic funding for the work we do. That's always going to be a part of what we do. But if we want to unlock that $1 trillion of funding, we need to find ways to incentivise outcomes.
Thanks, and we're seeing some of those comments that you made come up on the screen up there. Funding, collaboration, relationships, people, knowledge and education, a really important one as well. Tony, any reflections on that, or that, for you in terms of those enabling factors?
First thing that came to my mind, honestly, was, I've been working in awareness raising for 30 years, starting in the conservation sector, starting off with Perth Zoo career, and I'm a bit impatient for that. Excuse me, I'm a bit impatient for that now. I want to do some stuff. So I think awareness is really important, but one can spend their whole career doing that and still explaining to people what a chudich is or what a dibbler is or something like that. So funding, as we predicted, is front and biggest in those. So that's of kind of no surprise. Yeah, people and relationships, knowledge, and two-way knowledge too. That's all quite familiar and expected.
If I can just make a comment on the funding side too, and I've gone from being in the Conservancy space to now being in the restoration space, and I thought Conservancy was hard. Try restoration, and I think we've got to look at it and go try and change the discussion away from the lowest cost, and a lot of the carbon discussion has been about the lowest cost to deliver a stem in the ground, etc. But that doesn't give us the biodiversity we need. And we've got to really miss an opportunity if we're driven down that end of the things. So we've actually got to have some more mature discussions about how do we actually build in all the biodiversity and the cool things, so that when we're doing things like carbon plantings and more broadly, so we can get those amazing outcomes. But it's going to require lots of different funding sources, because not one source of funding can do everything. And we've also got to get it out of our heads that, the market's going to solve everything. The market's not going to solve everything, but we need, government, particularly in a policy side of things, to get out of the way and stop putting stupid policy stuff in place, or putting restrictions in place. And so then we need that to happen, and then we need the corporations, we need community, we need philanthropy, we need, markets. All of that will actually give us amazing outcomes.
Thank you. We've got a couple of great questions in here that I'll open up to. So, moving past the political ideology, are there any suggestions on how we build a bigger and more powerful constituency across diverse sectors to achieve our goals? And I think that reflects on, some of the discussions that have been happening over the last few days. Tony's mic's gone up quick to the...
and then Jodie, I'll give my input, and then I'll have to dash to catch a aeroplane. So, I was going to use a positive example that's happening at the moment that obviously, Jodie, you'd be aware of, and that's the work we're doing together as a bunch of us got together. We didn't have the luxury of time to, waste on bringing the group together, but just our ability as members of ALCA and ALCA itself to come together. So that's representatives from the Nature Conservancy, Pew, WWF and ALCA, and with Michael Cornish's regular emails to you all, I'm sure you get them as well, has been updating us on that. And that's putting together a pathways document, which is to go to the Minister to say, this is what our sector believes as one of the ways forward to achieve that 2030, to assist them. Obviously the government and its department is working on that themselves, but from our perspective, our sector's perspective, this is it's some help with that, and all due respect to James Fitzsimons and Sally Partridge in the room, who've been working on that together with representatives of those other organisations.
Thank you, Tony. And Tony has to go and catch a flight, so Tony, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate your time. Take care. Okay, so here's an interesting one. Are you concerned about the risk of losing voice and capacity of small, mid to medium NGOs, community groups and civil society when there's a lot of focus on organisations that, like yourselves, that might be in the room?
It's always a risk. And one of the things that concerns me, that we need to, so much of what we do is so important down at the local level. And it's about people putting in really hard work to change the reserves that are in their area. So I think that we need to, and there is so much need. It's not like we are fighting for space against each other, because the need is far greater than what we all do. And I think it's always one of the things you always need to think about when you're wanting to move at scale and at speed. This is a sector that it's so important that we always nurture the heart. And I think smaller organisations can actually be particularly good at that. But again, it just goes back to that idea of the system. Where is it that each of us is playing to make those benefits?
Even though we're large organisations, here on the stage, we all are part of communities. And I think that is what is critical, is the way we operate within those communities. And I look at some of the relationships that I've seen with numerous land care groups or a local landholder. Those are so, so critical. And we've got some amazing landholders in the room now that I know are employing their own ecologists and doing different things in their small businesses, and they're phenomenal. So I think the role for a lot of us as larger organisations is how do we actually support that, nurture that, and recognise that we are just one part. And that we're part of those local communities. And it's local communities where you build trust to be able to do stuff at scale. So it's critically important that we have the whole range of organisations and we're collectively supporting each other.
This is one, we haven't sort of talked so much about this, certainly not in some of the plenary discussions, but as a sector, do we need to import some experience and lessons? We have talked about in the context of what lessons can we learn from the carbon world, to accelerate the relationship with corporate and finance in particular. So there's a lot of things we could learn about the carbon world, but in particular to accelerate the relationships with corporate and finance.
Yeah, I'll take that. As I said, I work in several worlds, and I've been on the Climate Works Centre board for about 7 years. One of the things that was really interesting, and they've been the masters, I think, at having a systems thinking approach. One of the things, and I think that we need to spend some time looking at what's happened in the climate space, because I think that it will enable us to accelerate what it is that we're doing here, and the two are related as well. And I'll give an example, is that really early on there was an absolute recognition of not working first with the corporates but working with their investors, because the corporates, particularly if they're publicly listed, have to have shareholders and have activists that they're responding to. And you can see real change that's happened in that space, and I think that that's been a key in that area. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily what we need to do, but one of the great learnings is, where are the leverage points that you work first? And I'll give an example with ClimateWorks. When the Liberal government was in, it was clear that there was not going to be any action on climate change for many years. So we could have gone to try and work with the government, but it was a little bit like talk to the hand. So it was a case of how you worked in other areas, and it's about, because we've got finite resource, and it's where is it that we put it first. But I think that's absolutely right, and I think we also need to have a look at what's happening globally as well, because if someone's got a really great idea and we think it's applicable here in Australia, let's learn about it and do it. Thank you.
Final question, really coming back to me, is the theme, Unite for Nature. What does that mean for you? What does that look like for you, and why is that important? And maybe if each of you can answer that question, that would be a great way to wrap up.
For me, the word unite is about doing stuff together. It's deeper than collaboration. It's actually those deep relationships of trust that we build, recognising the skills and ability of each other to get the amazing outcomes at all different levels, and across, the whole sort of, I was going to say ecosystem, bad pun here, but I think you all get where I'm coming from. And recognising that private land conservation has a huge, huge part to play. Because of so much land being, privately owned within Australia, and so much activity is doing now. It's just how we connect it all up. We weave, this amazing web that will deliver the outcomes that we need.
Very similar. If I think about it at a sector level, private conservation has been going for between 30 or 40 years, maybe a bit longer, depending on how you measure it. That early journey for bush heritages and AWCs and others was a lot through acquisition, and there was government funding that came along with that acquisition through the NRS system. That's getting that level of funding and availability of land at a price point that is equitable to us, is getting rarer and rarer. We're supplying a lot of beef into Southeast Asia and other global markets. You've got all our billionaire friends of the Stokes and Forests and Reinhardts and so on all running around buying land, and it's making it very hard for organisations like AWC to go off and acquire land at scale. So the future will be dominated by collaborations and partnerships and working together and coming together to not just do the work on the ground and saving northern hairy-nosed wombats, but coming together to really solve problems at scale. Yeah, again, we have if you think about who we are on the stage here, who we've got in the room, we've got the tools and the systems and the wherewithal to change the continent. We've got an opportunity to change conservation outcomes, to change how land is being used at a continental scale. And that's really cool. And I just really encourage everybody, if you've got anything you take away, is just to pause and think at this point in time that we are, and the point in history that we are, to actually make a really national level change.
Thanks, Tim.
So if you think about the Global Biodiversity Framework, which, in my mind, 30 by 30, it's how I sort of remember it. That's not going to be through buying land alone. It's going to be private land. It's going to be, as it already is, working deeply and closely with traditional owners on their own land. It's working with the agricultural sector, and great presentation this morning. Because if you think about the conservation outcome and the example that was given this morning, where 20% of that property was now reserved for conservation and biodiversity. Now, that's not going to happen everywhere, but if you have 20%, agricultural sector, for example, is half of the owns or leases half of the land mass of Australia. If you had 20% of that land being held for conservation and biodiversity, and people in this room and others were working with them to achieve those conservation outcomes, you're getting the outcomes without actually having to buy. And it's how do we work with, for example, and my history is showing, how do we work with the water sector, who own large amounts of pristine land and are really leaning into being nature positive? How do we work with that sector? There's a whole lot of sectors that we can work with to get the conservation outcomes that we're after that doesn't require large amounts of capital to be able to, for us to be able to acquire land. So I think it's sort of, that's beyond the private land conservation, but I think we're about conservation and outcomes and partnering with others, as well as what we do on our own land to deliver those outcomes.
Thank you. Thank you for all the work that you do collectively and individually, and the contribution that makes to addressing the critical challenges that we have. It's been a pleasure wrapping this up with you.
Almost knocked her out at the last minute. What a great couple of days it has been on Ngunnawal Country. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Now, there is a feedback survey. You can fill it out, I think via the app. Was there going to be a QR code as well? I'm not sure. It's definitely in the app. You can also fill out surveys on each individual plenary and things like that. Tell us how you really feel. And of course, it's not completely over because you do have the field trips tonight and tomorrow. So if you're going out to spot bettongs, I do accept unsolicited qual pics, unsolicited bettong pics. If you've got any of that, I accept them without question into my inbox. So make sure you get that coming through. And if you've got any questions on the field trips, in all seriousness, make sure you head over to the registration desk. They'll be able to help you sort that out so that your time in Canberra is as fulfilling as possible. Now, I'm going to hand over just shortly to Jodie and Vic, who are going to wrap up the conference. So this will be the last from me. I'm Anne Jones. Catch me on the radio or the TV or social media, or catch me out in the bush, where I'll probably be bird watching, and I'll see you there.
Thank you, everyone. I feel very inspired, very hopeful, and despite an incredibly busy few days, still very energetic, filled, by the energy in the room and all of the work that you're all doing. Thank you all for being part of it and making it as dynamic and diverse and interesting as it has been. To our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who are still in the room, thank you for being here with us today over the last few days, and particularly for coming into this room after the weekend that has been. And we do welcome all of your feedback ongoing, across the days ahead, to ensure that we can continue to make this conference as accessible, as beneficial and as culturally safe as it possibly can be. And we look forward to continuing to explore how ALCA and how our members can continue on the journey of recognition and of listening and build the opportunities that lie ahead of us. To the landholders and organisations who have joined us, thank you for the work that you do in stewarding nature on our lands and waters, and to the organisations that work and partner and support all of you. Across the last few days, we've been awed by the leadership, the innovation, the tireless efforts of the conservation and land management sector. We've heard of critical policy needs, the role of communication, of funding and finance, and of how to leverage partnerships and allies. We have come to Canberra to bring the sector to the doorstep of the federal government, and we'll continue to work and partner with state, territory and federal governments to address our shared challenges. These challenges are significant, but we are ready. Look at you all in the room, it's amazing. To better enable us to address our dual climate and biodiversity crises, Australia needs a whole-of-government response, strong laws, we have heard that a lot across the days, and given the challenge, major cornerstone investment to optimise the contribution of the sector so that it can leverage and deliver. Tomorrow morning, a small delegation will table the statement to Parliament to Minister Plibersek, and we will provide it also to the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet in the afternoon. Thank you all for your input into that document. It will be updated before we head in the morning. It's almost there. There's been quite a bit of feedback and a bit of work to do, and we will make it available to you all online after you've departed. Government is important, but also philanthropy, industry and the private sector will all be critical to reverse the decline of our biodiversity. Fighting the nature crisis is absolutely a shared national project and a global challenge. And only when the resources and capacity match the enormity and urgency of the challenge can the social, economic and environmental outcomes that we are already delivering be leveraged and scaled. By way of organisational updates, we have 17 members who are working hard across the country addressing our biodiversity and climate challenges. These are just our members, but the sector is much bigger. And I want to celebrate all of your work. I want to thank our members for their support. ALCA is only successful when our organisations, when our members and our sector is successful. And it's a privilege to work with our members and for my team and myself to be standing up here representing such incredible organisations and the broader sector. We are continuing to gradually expand our membership and you will see new members slowly and gradually come on board, and we're doing that deliberately in a staged approach, and we'll keep you updated as this happens and as opportunities arise. We've seen an increasing interest in the conference this year from both within the sector, which is really important, and a broader diversity of delegates, demonstrating the increasing interest that our society has in nature. We would expect and we will strive for that to grow each year. The importance and the increasing relevance of this conference can't be underestimated. And so we are going to take the ALCA conference next year to Sydney in October. This will allow us to connect with the Nature Positive Summit that we understand will be held there and present an opportunity to showcase our work to a global audience. More will be announced soon, including various opportunities for engagement and partnership. There are many friends, colleagues and allies in this room. Thank you. A room which is only going to get bigger and more diverse. For in Australia and around the world, there has never been a more urgent or a more serious need to protect, manage and restore nature. So congratulations to all of you for all of your work, and thank you. Can I just thank you all? Now I really would just like to do a few particular and personal thank yous. I'd really like to thank all of the speakers. The speakers have been absolutely phenomenal, so incredibly inspiring, and also to our keynote speakers who have travelled from across the globe to come and share their knowledge and experience with us here in the room. I would like to thank our 4 conference partners again. Without the support of the financial contribution of our partners, as well as their intellectual knowledge and capacity, bringing together programs such as this would be challenging. So we really appreciate all of the support and effort. The sponsors, the many of the sponsors that have supported, enabled and celebrated the work that we're doing together. We have major sponsors, important strategy partners, dinner sponsors, valued sponsors, event sponsors. You are all incredibly important to enable the work that we're doing. So I thank you all individually and collectively, because for you, we are all in this room together. I would also like now in particular to thank our incredible MC. She has kept things upbeat, energetic, enthusiastic. She's brought complex things down to some very commonly understood terms, and so I would really like to thank Anne personally. She's going to have to come up to the stage.
This is better than a Logie.
You're wonderful. We love you. Thank you, Anne. I'd also like to thank the very behind-the-scenes programming group. We've had an amazing group of people helping to build the conference, and they've been brought forward from our partners and some of our major sponsors. So you can just stand up so that we can all give you a clap, because we tried to talk them into facilitating and doing some front-of-scene stuff. They're quite happy sitting back, helping, identifying. So can you just stand up so we can all cheer you? The program's as awesome as it is because of the thought that you put into it. So thank you very much. Come up the stage later for a little gift. I would also like to thank a number of individuals who have helped ALCA to deliver our access and engagement strategy. BHP Foundation have been really important in providing multi-year partnership to enable us to provide a conference that is accessible, beneficial and culturally safe. We've got a lot of work to do and it's a journey, but we're taking that step by step and continuing to engage and make sure that we're doing what we can in that space. There's been a big group of people. I know many have left now, but if there are any that were on that slide that saw their name and are still in the room, I would also love if any of you could stand up so that we can give you a clap. It's very possible they have left. But let's cheer them in any case. And if you are shy and quiet, please do come up to the room up to the front for a gift afterwards. And Maria Watson-Trudgett has been fantastic in working with us for a couple of years as our cultural consultant to help us in that space. I would also like to thank now really just the people who have pulled this together. And again, they don't have to come up onto the stage, but TPM, the events team, we've been working with them for a couple of years to get the conference running, and it was meant to be in real life last year and didn't. So I feel like they have been working really with us for about 2.5 years to be here today. So I really do just want to give them an absolutely huge round of applause, because they've suffered, all the logistics and the to's and the fro's and the backs and forwards over a few years to actually be in this room today. So thank you to the full TPM team. If Lynn or Jeanette do want to come up and receive a bunch of flowers, we'd be very appreciative. Or I can just hand it back to you. They're not going to come. They're too shy, but I would just like to say a big thank you. There may also be a birthday in the team as well, so I won't embarrass her and get her up onto the stage, but happy birthday. And finally, I'd just like to thank my team. The team have been absolutely incredible, again, working for well over a year and a half to 2 years to come to being here in this room, both in the context of creating the program, creating us being here today from an events perspective, but also all of the content work, all of the policy work that goes in and behind the scenes to build a sector that can come here, be here, and deliver the amazing work that you do. Michael, Phoebe, Bryony, Monica, and our newest Selman, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your work is fabulous, and we're all very appreciative of your help. No one wants to get up onto the stage. It's just me, clearly. All right. Just a quick one also from the board. The board, thank you for your help and your work and the work that you do for ELCA. They're able to take their hats off as they come into the boardroom and really think about what the sector needs and how, obviously their organisation is important, but to take off their hats and think about the sector is a really fantastic thing. So thank you to our board. And I think, Vic, over to you. Thanks, everyone.
So, on behalf of the board, I would like to echo all of the thanks that Jodie has just outlined. Obviously, so many people have been involved in putting this together, and so, again, on behalf of the board, thank you all very much. So, my job, well, there is one thanks that I need to make. I would like to say thank you very much to the ALCA team, all of the team that pulled it together. Jodie has thanked them, but I've had a lot to do with them in order to get this together as well. So thank you very much, everybody. On behalf of the board, on behalf of our partners, and you know what, I'm guessing really on behalf of all of us in this room, I want to thank Jodie. So Jodie and I recently were both together at the Land Trust Alliance conference in the USA a month or so ago, and there were 2,200 people there. Look, seriously, it was massive, and we didn't feel overwhelmed, but we knew we were coming back to this one. I just want to say, Jodie, that comparatively speaking, when I think about the number of people that live in the USA and the number of people who live here in Australia, you and the team have pulled together something that's even bigger than that. So thank you very, very much. I think we have all enjoyed ourselves. Well, look, I have. I hope I speak for you all. It's been great. I've had a lot of fun, learned a lot, but most importantly, I've had a really great time. And every single detail has been looked after by, again, Jodie and the team. The big picture, after all, this is really big picture. We've been talking about that, but also the smallest details have been covered off. To be able to think both at that level and at the small level, it's really, it's amazing. So thank you. And I would now, on behalf of all of us, like to give Jodie her bunch of flowers. Jodie, you do have to come up. So that really brings us to the end. I would like to thank, I welcomed you at the beginning. I'd like to thank all of you very much for coming. Just being here is contributing to the private land conservation sector and the power that we are and the things that we need to do. It's an effort to get here. I mean, wherever you are in Australia, chances are you're going to have to travel. You're going to have to make that booking, you're going to have to get yourselves here, you're going to have to stay somewhere other than at home. And thank you so much, all of you, for doing that. It's been truly wonderful. I know that some of you are going on field trips tonight, tomorrow. I think some of you are coming to see the Minister tomorrow morning, and some of you will be leaving right now to go home. So safe travels, take it easy, and see you in 2024. Thank you very much.